Cool. I think we're ready to go. I've hit record, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name's Archana, and welcome to Data Plus Women's November virtual meetup. We have a jam-packed agenda today, so I'm just going to jump straight into it with the usual announcements, just so we can jump straight into the content. So for those of you that are new to our community, welcome. We're excited to have you and hope to see you at our future events, whether they be virtual for now and hopefully when we're back in person too. Data Plus Women is a community and meetup group for women who work in, with, and around data. Our aim is to promote and celebrate the achievements and successes of women working in this industry and also give them a platform to share their knowledge and experience. And this means that absolutely everyone is welcome to join. So please feel free to share our events with your networks. It's welcome to everyone, not just women. Data Plus Women is a community, and we wouldn't be where we are without the entire team. So I want to thank the gang for their work putting together these events on top of their day jobs. So if everyone wants to give a wave, just to say hi to everyone. So make sure to give everyone a little love on Twitter, and our official account and hashtag is in the corner as well. So stay in touch. So with that, I'm just going to give a few announcements. If you've been to one of our events before, you'll know this drill. It's the same spiel every time. So as you might know, we've extended our virtual community to LinkedIn. This group represents all the Data Plus Women chapters globally. So it's a chance to connect with like-minded women around the world. If you just search Data Plus, and it's the symbol, not the word, women on LinkedIn to request access. It is a private group. We approve everyone though. It's just because we have a code of conduct that we'd like to uphold. So feel free to put in that request as soon as possible. And then we're always looking for more speakers. And as we go into 2021 planning, it looks like we are going to be having virtual events for a little while longer. So while that is disappointing news, we miss out on all the networking and meeting people and drinks and pizza and stuff. It does mean that we can work with your schedule. So if you want to do a lunchtime event, a coffee break event, an evening event, whatever works for you, we can make it fit to your schedule as well, which opens up the range of potential speakers. We can have a lot more. So do have a think over the Christmas break. And we're open to any and all ideas, and we'll work with you to brainstorm something that can work for this audience as well. And then last announcement from me is we are on top of things, as I like to say. So we already have our December event live, and we're celebrating the holiday season with our sisters in Europe with a cross-channel event. So we'll be reflecting back on 2020 with Anna and Ileana of Picnic Technology, a data-driven grocery delivery company similar to Ocado for those of you in the UK. And Picnic is based in the Netherlands. And we'll also be looking back at Black Friday and holiday shopping trends with Kayla Schwartz of Salesforce Commerce Cloud. It'll be a fun one with quizzes and prizes to win as well, so be sure to register. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Merve. Merve is a social policy enthusiast and researcher, currently working towards her PhD in social sciences at UCL in the UK and LISA in Luxembourg. In her ongoing research, she studies parental leave policies, particularly parental leave reform in Luxembourg and its impact on fathers' leave take-up behaviors across different types of workplaces. Before starting her doctoral studies, she was a research analyst at a social policy consultancy, where she had the opportunity to undertake field work from Pakistan to Lebanon, and her portfolio includes projects on women's empowerment, early childhood care and education, and service provision. So definitely the expert in this topic. I'm really excited for her talk, as I'm sure her research has taken an interesting turn this year, as this year has posed many challenges, but also opportunities in policymaking in this space. If you have any questions as we go, please make sure to leave them in the Q&A box, as we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I'll hand over to Merve.
Thanks very much, and I'm humbled to hear this. And I used to be quite a regular attendee at Data Plus Women London events, and now it feels a bit exciting to be this part of the screen. And I am a bit too nervous, as you might understand from my sound. And now I am sharing my screen for the presentation. Let me know if you can see it well or not. Hopefully it works.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so next, within next 15 to 20 minutes, I will be taking you through leave policies mainly, with a focus on COVID-19 pandemic. My research is not necessarily focusing on COVID, actually, so I'm not really working on COVID, but now my expertise more on leave policies, and now I will be trying to give you first an idea of what leave policies are and what did we already have before the COVID crisis broke. And then I will be talking about, so with when the COVID happened, how countries responded to this crisis to support basically employees with care responsibilities. And then I will be talking and I will be mentioning how does it look like from the worker point of view? What are the new measures taken at the workplaces? And then in the end, I will conclude with how all these things come together. Um, and apologies in advance that I will be using more of a heteronormative language, and it will be more of a Eurocentric approach given the structure of these policies, basically. And the research that I will be citing are based on mostly UK data. So there are emerging studies, many new studies are taking place in the UK by using understanding society data or UK household longitudinal survey and many other COVID focused, COVID only surveys. So let's get started. So what do we have? So across the EU, we have several different leave policies, uh, basically for working adults with care responsibilities. Mainly, I will be speaking for working parents, actually. So the first part of the leaves they are addressing new parents. So we have maternity leave, which can be defined as a health and welfare measure. So this is more to give new mothers to an opportunity to recover from birth and to establish initial bonds with the newborn babies. And across the EU, this is more or less, it was 14 weeks and now it is 18 weeks long. And it is paid or unpaid, so it depends on the country. But usually it is, yeah, maternity leave is mostly a paid leave. And we also have a paternity leave, which is directed to new fathers. So basically to give new fathers to an opportunity, a time off from work to be with the new mother and the baby. So this is more way shorter compared to maternity leave. And we also additionally have parental leave. So, and this is where I will be mainly talking. This is more advanced and more complex and contemporary, let's say, version of these, an extension maybe of these maternity and paternity leave. So because this is more of a care measure compared to whereas we define maternity leave as a health and welfare measure. So what does parental leave mean, or what it stands for, is to give parents throughout their initial years of their parenthood to take time off from work to spend time with their children and for care, basically. And this can be in many different forms, so it differs from one country to another. It is usually equally available for both parents, and it is almost always, in many cases, let's say, is an employee right, which means that parents are uh, eligible to this right unless, as long as they fulfill certain eligibility criteria depending on their employment characteristics, which can be affected by their employment history, a number of hours work, the type of contract they have. So it's maybe in different forms. In some countries, it is way too strict, saying that a parent must be like to be eligible must be working with the same employer for a certain amount of time, or in another one it maybe a bit more flexible and asking only they might be working for a certain amount of time per week. And so it can be an individual right or a family right. It can be a transferable or non-transferable right, which means that so each parent, so eligibility of each parent are depends on their own individual employment characteristics. But in some cases, or at least it used to be for some time, was dependent on one parent's eligibility. So in an ideal world, it's what is better. So where it is working better than the other places, it's when it is defined as an individual and non-transferable right, because basically when it is, and of course if it is paid, when it is a, and in the way that it is transferable, which means that one parent, so parents, both of them have certain amount of time given to them, but they can actually share this time in between or just transfer their months to the other parent. But in those cases, it is what happens usually, mothers ending up taking most of the leave, which is then adding more, like increasing their time away from labor market, and then negatively affecting, so it's increasing the gender pay gap basically. And it can be paid or unpaid, so it depends on the country setting. But if so, in a way, rule of thumbs is if it is paid more than 65% of previous meaning pre-leave salary, then it is considered as a generous payment. It can be in the way that, for instance, a parent might have access to, let's say, 30 months of leave, but only, let's say, for 6 months is paid. So a parent can have access to longer period of time for leave, but that doesn't mean that it is all, it will be all paid or covered. So most recent European Commission directive around this suggests each parent having access to 4 months of parental leave, with 2 months being non-transferable. So this is to secure fathers basically taking some leave. Um, Additionally, the again most recent work-life reconciliation directive from the Commission also mentions about carers leave, which is not necessarily for working parents, but it is for employees with care responsibilities. So if an employee has someone that is in need of care, this person might be a household member or a relative, so they can ask for 5 working days carers leave per year. So what all these policies have in common is that they come with a job security. So when you apply for this leave, these are statutory rights, so you have right to ask for this leave. Of course, workplaces, companies also have a say, at least they have to approve. So usually how it works that before you are planning to be on leave, so like 4 or 5 months in advance, you inform your HR basically that you are planning to be on leave for this period of time, and they can negotiate with you. Usually they don't reject, I think, but they also have a say, so they can negotiate and like to move around or what works best. So also the other thing which is important to mention, since especially speaking for parental leave, this is subject to eligibility criteria, which also means that it is not for everyone's access, which may create more inequalities and more vulnerabilities, because usually where this policy works is for those people who are working full time, and especially if what the research shows, if the take up is usually higher if people are working, when people are working big companies basically, so it's easy to replace or at least distribute the person's workload among other colleagues. But if it is very small, then it might be more tough, let's say, to manage. But usually if so it depends from one country to country, but for instance, for some countries, self-employed are not eligible for parental leave, or if like people on irregular work schedules or like 0-hour contracts, they may not be eligible for parental leave. Also, in some countries, especially when the same-sex marriages are not legally recognized, then those parents don't really have access to parental leave, or even in some places when it is where it is like lawfully recognized, they may still not be eligible for parental leave. So there is a variation in access, which also affects people how they manage these responsibilities and navigate around. And so this is what we already had and what we still have. And then what happened with COVID? So when the COVID pandemic broke, one thing that countries do is immediately closing the schools. So basically nurseries, creches, schools, they were either partially or entirely closed for certain amount of time. This was mainly starting from mid-March and until the and basically until summer holidays. And it was in most of the places, it was only open for key workers, children. This, of course, this was like a protection measure, but also it's connected to provision of other policies. For instance, some changes in parental leave. So usually when a parent is on parental leave, they have to use it as they opted in. So let's say if you are in the if you opted in for like for 6 months of leave, then you have to be using 6 months altogether, unless otherwise it is mentioned or stated. So you cannot really interrupt your leave. If you interrupt at some point, you lose the remaining part. So, but since this was an exceptional time, in some countries they actually allowed these interruptions. And some countries, they actually introduced extra measures. For example, Luxembourg, where I am connecting from now, introduced two different leave measures. So one was addressing working parents who have children under age 13 and whose schools or education facilities were closed. So they were granted an extra leave, which means that even if they had used parental leave before, or for instance here parental leave is until you can take it until your child is 6 years old. So now this was the new leave for all parents with children under age 13, that you could apply for this leave, and it will be fully compensated. So you would get your salary fully paid during this period. The upper ceiling level was 5 times minimum social income. So it's most of the parents who applied for this would get their full income. So it started mid March, and it was people could take it until mid July. And with the same conditions, there was also another leave specifically addressing for employees with care responsibilities. So if you had someone like another adult, or like someone older than age 13, basically, that you had to provide care for, then you could apply for that leave as well. There are also some additional measures that were introduced from different countries. So some introduced more income replacement, some more like childcare allowances, vouchers, free meals, some introduced parental credits. So it's different, all countries together, they started addressing immediately from different angles to support mainly like working parents or employees with care responsibilities. On the other hand, what happened with what happened from the worker point of view, or like working parent point of view, that you have to, so people started adapt their working hours quite quickly. And now, from now on, I will be citing research from the UK. And so one of the things that the research shows, the ONS data shows that nearly 40% of men and women started working from home. So this flexible working might be in different forms. So it can be in the form of working from home. It can be in the form of compressed hour, flexi hour. So it depends how it is defined. But research shows that there are great inequalities between low paid and high paid employees. So high paid employees have higher chances to be working from home. They have more opportunities, whereas low paid employees, they don't really have the similar settings, either because of the work of the, because of the problem, I mean, mainly because of the nature of their work. And of course, being at home and work, and kids also being at home, it increased fathers and mothers, so parents, all responsibilities basically. And the research shows that 10% of fathers reduce their working hours due to care work, compared to 20% of mothers. So both parents are affected, and as usual, no surprises, mothers are affected even more. And it is, so they also found that this type of adaptation, new working schemes, created some stress, especially if there's only one parent who is adopted their work schedules. And if it is a lone parent household, that is, they are affected even worse. And even from some cases, this meant income loss, basically because in relation with that, they have to reduce their paid work time. And so this was about like 30% of reduction in paid work time. And this is also, if you look at, if you compare mothers and fathers, you see that it is even higher for mothers compared to fathers. And of course, if you are a non-key worker, it is also, you have higher chances of reducing your paid work and then losing income. And if you're a single mother, basically you are the most disadvantageous group. So this all this together, so working from home, having kids at home, actually turned mothers and fathers in a way into jugglers. So they have to do everything together. Now they have more paid work to do and housework to do, and childcare to do. Basically, they have to manage everything together. And so both mothers and fathers started combining their work with other activities. And for mother, it was most of the time childcare, and basically they nearly used half of their time also doing childcare while they're working. And research also finds that during this time, actually there is an increase in fathers' contribution to childcare, which is great. But it is very important, and I think that is fascinating, that the fathers whose contribution for childcare increased, and for also housework, are the fathers who took paternity leave before. So these were the fathers who were already a bit more involved in care work and housework. So I will come back to this point later. But so, this is great to see that there is a convergence, and there is even though slight a decrease in gender gap in time use. The inequalities we see from other research as well still persist. And research finds that there's about 9 hours of gender gap in care work. So one of the studies found that during lockdown in the UK, women undertook 5 more hours of housework and 10 more hours of childcare than men in the UK. And in another study, they found that mothers spend 27 hours per week on childcare, whereas fathers spend 16 hours, which accounts for 9 hours of gender gap in care work. So the inequality still goes on. And so what all these pictures show to us. So we have some existing policies, we had this crisis broke, and we have immediate actions taken both by the like employees and the employers, and supported by policies. I think what is one important detail, this can be applied in many aspects, is removing barriers in access. So as I mentioned, there are certain eligibility criteria, and it is not for everyone's access basically, which is a shame, because the people who don't really have access or who have limited access are the ones usually in the most need. So they are the ones who are more involved in precarious work, or have low job security. So they are more fragile in a way. So it's very important to really provide these policies to make it for everyone's access, basically. At least if we define them as like employment right, then to make sure that everyone in employment and labor market have access. What is also important, as we know by now very well, is to have the job security. So these policies come with job security component, but of course, as I just mentioned, uh, so those people who already have uh, like who don't really have secure jobs, so what do they do? So this is also a crucial aspect. With mothers and fathers, or like all the workers now being in a way this like jugglers between working from home and care work and housework, and really not knowing when the work starts or when it ends. So it's very important how we really define or refine working, like flexible working hours. So what it really is and how it's really works. So it's important to have more predictable schedules, basically. And in the end, as research shows, and this is the key, because these policies, like especially parental leave policies, have a great promise in a way to improve gender equality, to close gender gaps, and so on and so forth. But if you start reading papers around this, and in one of the most recent research from Austria also showed that we don't really see a huge improvement for gender equality. And this is because it is very skewed towards mothers being the leave takers, and then being away from the job market for a longer period of time. So it's really important to have fathers on board and making this basically the new normal and also like to promote this from the workplace's point of view as well. So because it is not enough if when the policies are trying to encourage this, if it is not really find a, like a voice in the field. So it's important to really encourage fathers to be on board, to involve in care work, and so this would really help to improve and to really deliver these policies to their purposes. And this will be the end of my talk. Basically, if you need more information, we will, I think, be sending in the emails, the papers that I was citing. And Leave Network, you can just go their website and you can search for your country, and the most important, most updated information will be there. And based on that data, I created some visuals on Tableau, so you can also check that out, compare and contrast what is available, what is out there for parental leave, paternity leave, and maternity leave. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Hope it was fun to listen for you. And I'm really curious to hear about your experiences, because I assume at least some of you basically were the people that I was, like the people who were subject to this research, who had some like employees, workers with care responsibilities or young children. So I would love to hear how was your experience, and what would be ideal from your experience that you would really desire to have while you are managing this crisis and your work and care responsibilities all together, while the new ways of working are emerging and quickly changing. So thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Merve. I definitely learned a lot as someone without children myself, but it's still interesting to know because it's something that could impact my future. It's actually good timing. We recently on our team just this morning had a new baby announcement of a new father on our team. So obviously Ryan
Congratulations.
Paternity leave. So hopefully taking all of it that's available to him. Of course, I'm sure he is. What I'll do in the interest of time, we did have some comments rather than questions. So I'll just read out those comments, and then maybe we'll come back to more questions at the end once people have had some more time to think about it. But we did have a comment from Claire saying in the company she works for, they have recently equalized maternity and paternity leave, meaning dad can get 13 weeks fully paid leave instead of just the 10 days, which is of course means more time to spend bonding with the baby and also helping mum out.
Yeah, that's cool.
So clearly
Congrats.
some progress, being made there. Claire, if you're around at the end, I would love to know a little bit more about kind of what that process was like within a company, like changing that policy and driving that forward. Feel free to kind of expand on that in the comments, but I do want to move on just in the interest of time as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. So next up is Nan. Nan Craig is a writer, researcher, and data analyst with Faethm, the world's data source for the fourth industrial revolution and the future of work. Previously, she was program director at the Center for Global Studies with Lord Robert Skidelsky, I'm hoping I got that right, researching the future of work and how technology will impact societies. She co-edited Work in the Future, the Automation Revolution, a collection of essays on the future of work as well. Until 2020, automation was touted as the biggest change to shake up the workplace in the coming years. And instead, COVID-19 has dramatically altered lives and workplaces in just a matter of months. So now the two are interacting. And as COVID-19 accelerates automation trends, and in turn, automation helps us overcome the challenges of maintaining the economy while social distancing, we suddenly have lots of new questions to ask. So what can automation do for us and to us? And how has that changed in 2020? What are the possibilities? And also, where could it all go wrong? So with that, I'm going to hand straight over to Nan. And again, don't forget to leave your questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm just going to share my screen, if I can do this. There we go. And start this. Can everyone see that? Is that good? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to come and talk to you today about the future of work. Arshan has pretty much covered this, I think, but I've been lucky enough to work on this for several years now. And then after doing research on work for quite a long time, I decided last year I wanted to learn more about data science and AI. So I did the data science immersive at General Assembly. And then in August, I came to work for Faethm. And oh, there we go. Okay, just have to find the right key for that. And my interest in work is actually a lot broader than just automation. So I was really interested in Merve's presentation as well. But just for today, I'm going to speak to you specifically about how this force is changing the nature of work. And also I should mention that although I'm going to speak a bit about what Faethm does today, I'm going to mostly give my own opinion more broadly about work as a researcher, and I'm not going to go into Faethm's work in a lot of depth. So here's a quick rundown about what I'll talk about. We're going to cover a little bit on the history of automation and work, and then what do we mean when we talk about AI-based automation technologies. A little bit about Faethm's approach to work and automation, and a little bit about what I'll explain are automation versus augmentation. And then, as I said, I'll talk about the trends due to COVID-19 and automation, and then wrap it up by looking at what do we want from work and how can automation help us achieve that. So first of all, why should we worry about automation and work? And the answer is because of this. This is the history of automation in a nutshell. So on the left, you can see the Luddites, who were highly skilled textile workers, who were put out of work because of mechanical looms, which were so simple, they could be and were, in fact, operated by children. And then on the right, you can see what we have today, the benefits from automation, modern technology, medical advancement, and, in this case, maybe much better diagnosis. So there's always been a really big debate amongst economists about the extent to which automation is good versus how damaging it is. And the answer tends to be that it's good in the long term, destabilizing and destructive in the short term, which is the events on the left. So the reason it's a benefit in the long term is that automation is the only way really that we get really substantial increases in productivity, which is also what drives increases in our standard of living, as well as wage increases in the long term. Now, the guy on the left here is Joseph Schumpeter, who is an Austrian economist, who referred to this as creative destruction. And he saw it as an essential feature of capitalism, really, that the old industries and ways of doing things are constantly reassessed. A new, cheaper way of doing things comes along that outpaces the old way. And in that process, the old jobs disappear. The problem with all of that is that, as the guy on the right, whose name is John Maynard Keynes, said, in the long run, we're all dead. Actually, his full quote was, and I'm going to give it to you in full because it's a bit of a classic, the long run is a misleading guide to current affairs. In the long run, we are all dead. Economists set themselves too easy, too useless a task if in tempestuous seasons, they can only tell us that when the storm is past, the ocean is flat again. So Keynes's point is really that you can't just accept short-term economic instability just because it will have all evened out in 50 years. Because in 50 years of instability is still enough time to ruin a human life and really, a generation of people's lives. And especially you can't if the nature of the world that we live in is for things to constantly fluctuate and change in the economic system that we're living in. I should add as well that Keynes actually coined the phrase technological unemployment, and he argued in 1933 that by the year 2030, due to productivity increases, we would all be working 15-hour weeks in order to achieve the same standards of living as they were achieving then. Now, his calculations about productivity were actually correct, and economists are still arguing over why we aren't already working much shorter hours. Now, because humans are creative, we always find new things to do and we create more jobs around those new industries. But the period between the destruction and the creation can still be really, really volatile and damaging to people's lives and their careers. And there's been a sense the last few years that this wave of change could be different to the last. Different how? Well, partly the answer is that it's cognitive as well as physical work that can be automated this time. So you might recognize some of these women. These ladies are all computers. The women on the left are Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan, who worked at NASA in the mid-20th century, carrying out incredibly complicated calculations to work out flight trajectories and other essential engineering calculations. And you might recognize as well the inset picture at the bottom, which is from the film of their lives, which came out a year or two ago, called Hidden Figures. Now, right up until the 1970s, these people, who were called computers, were essential to a lot of engineering and scientific activities. And because this was considered to be tedious work, it was often left to women. And in the 19th and early 20th centuries, this was one of the only ways women could participate in science. So the woman on the right, the astronomer Henrietta Swan Leavitt, discovered, if I get this right, the relationship between luminosity and the period of Cepheid variables, and laid the groundwork for Edwin Hubble's discovery that the universe was expanding. But her job was only ever as a computer. She worked at the Harvard Observatory, going through photographs of astronomical events. Now, when artificial computers came in, those roles disappeared very quickly. The computers that replaced these women were not AI. They were quite basic machines that took up a whole room and were less powerful than a smartphone today. But I think it's an example of machines replacing cognitive work, beginning to replace cognitive work, in the same way that skilled manual work began to be replaced early in the Industrial Revolution. And what I also think this helps illustrate is that people are capable of performing well beyond the strict confines of their job role. Now, obviously, these women were especially restricted by the inequalities of their time to what jobs they were allowed to do. But I think people are always capable of more than their role strictly dictates. And to me, this illustrates again why the possibilities of automation are not a disaster for us. Now, what kind of cognition replacing technologies are we talking about when we look at the future of work now? I think the media tend to create a lot of mystery around the idea of AI. But I want to stress that in essence, AI is mostly about using mathematical modeling and advanced statistical techniques to find and predict patterns in data, which is something I think everyone in this group can relate to. And as a technology, that makes it almost infinitely versatile. If you can find the patterns in speech, you can create chatbots that are able to respond to human queries. You can use it to assess whether a shape falling into the path of a driverless car is a plastic bag or a child. You can use it, as Amazon and Netflix do, by trying to predict what your customers will want to buy and in order to sell them more stuff. Or you can identify whether a dark area on a brain scan is more likely to be a malignant or a benign tumor. The important thing about this is the versatility is part of why it could potentially cause so much upheaval. Because it's so versatile, it's not one discrete invention, and the effects are closer to something like the discovery of electricity. The same way electricity changed everything and became part of every aspect of our lives, automation from AI is likely to do the same. So let's move on to Faethm. Where does Faethm fit into this? Faethm was founded in 2017, and it's really based on the founder Mike Prittis's more optimistic, positive view on the future of work, a belief that there'll be a growth of jobs based on automation, not this sort of giant contraction and massive unemployment. So Faethm's purpose within that is to help smooth the transition as industries change by helping identify where it's possible to move people from work that is reducing to work that is growing. It's a software as a service platform, and it allows businesses and governments to do scenario planning that lets them work out how various technologies could be used in their work and which roles are going to be affected by those technologies. And the platform works on a set of models that uses an ontology of over 5,000 job families and over 72,000 job titles broken down into over 20,000 tasks, as well as expert assessments of how quickly technologies will be available and tech adoption rates across different industries and countries to model how technology is likely to affect any particular job. Within that, I want to briefly talk about just a few aspects of the way Faethm thinks about jobs, which also map across to the way economists often approach this problem as well. Firstly, jobs don't get automated, tasks do. So we break down jobs into their component tasks and work out which technology is likely to affect each task and to what extent. And then secondly, technologies don't all affect tasks in the same way. In some places, they might replace humans doing that task altogether, which is what you think of as straightforward automation. For instance, if you check a box to set off the process of dispatching an order when it comes in, that's not really something that needs a human at all to do it. But on other tasks, automation might complement the human work by letting us do it faster or letting us reach new levels of skill. The Faethm platform refers to that as augmentation rather than automation. And if you want a quick example, then you can think of the new function in Gmail that suggests the end of the sentence for you as you're typing. And you can see from that that that's never going to be able to simply write the whole email for you, but it can help you skip through it a lot faster and get it out a lot more quickly. These two aspects work together. So when a task is automated, we automatically start to do more of it because the cost has gone down. There's no cost to doing it. So you can do more. There's no reason not to. And one example of this, which comes up in Richard and Daniel Susskind's book about the future of the professions, is the idea of legal search. So legal searches used to involve legal secretaries hunting through vast amounts of paper case law to find precedents. And then automated legal search software was created that could just do that. But actually, the number of legal secretaries didn't shrink. It actually grew because more cases could be brought to trial. And that meant lots of the other work around them also increased. And that work could only be done by humans. So this is part of why augmentation is really important, is because as technology lets us do more, augmentable tasks that still require human involvement are often the places where jobs growth happens. And on top of that, I've added at the bottom here, you also get addition of new jobs, which involves creating and maintaining the new technology infrastructure. So you get, new data scientists and coders and, developers who help to build and maintain that. So the key thing that the Faethm platform does, beyond letting us look at scenarios for automation, is identify how people might move from a job where a substantial amount of the role is being automated to one where there's going to be a lot of growth. And that's really the most important part of what we're doing. We're trying to help mitigate the upheaval in people's lives and careers by pointing out pathways for reskilling and to show businesses and governments how they can move people along those pathways to where jobs can grow. Okay, I'm moving on a bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation that we're now in and how COVID is likely to accelerate these changes. So first of all, automation isn't a steady process. It often progresses in fits and starts, and sometimes an event like a recession can be the impetus that companies need to reassess what they're doing and introduce more automation. So the downturn that's likely to come out of the pandemic is going to have companies reassessing their processes and where they can cut costs. Secondly, and this kind of ties into the previous point, the balance of how expensive human labor is versus how expensive it is to introduce the technology can be a decisive factor as well. So in some cases, you can find that there's a lower incentive for companies to do the capital investment to introduce automation if their workers are already on minimum wage or very low wages. I don't know if any of you followed the Financial Times investigation or the BBC a few months ago on clothing manufacturers in Leicester. These are unofficial factories who are producing cheap clothes for big online brands like Boohoo, and they were doing it using illegally cheap below minimum wage labor. They were making it so even companies in the same area in Leicester who were using the best, most up-to-date sewing technology were having trouble keeping their prices low enough to compete against them because they paid their workers almost nothing. And you can see there the trade-off between automation versus low wages. But the reverse of that situation is actually happening with COVID because it's making a lot of people more expensive to employ. So if you run a business that requires workers to be there in person, you also now need to pay for PPE. You need to have more space for them to work in. You need to factor in time off possibly for them to self-isolate if they come into contact with somebody, or time off for sick pay. So you probably need to look at possibly reducing the number of people who are in the current space while still getting the same amount of work done. So suddenly there's a real need to be able to produce more with fewer people. And then next, we've got the situation of going remote. So if you have a situation where everything can be done remotely, you're already in a place where technology is augmenting our productivity. It's allowing us to have meetings without traveling to see each other like we're doing today. or to access documents together and collaborate without paying for the overheads of an office. And suddenly that augmenting technology that we were already using to some extent is being put to its full use. And once you make work remote, it's even easier to start to see where it could be possible to bring in, other kinds of automation, possibly like using a bot to answer questions or queries that maybe were done in person before. And then another one, I would say, is you now have possibly an additional need for robot labor that might help to avoid putting humans at risk. Now, we already use a lot of robot technology in a lot of situations where we want to avoid risk, like bomb disposal or mining or underwater salvage. But now we might add things like cleaning and sanitizing to that list. I think this is also likely to give some slight boost, at least, to technologies in the care sector that provide assistance and care to the elderly, things like care robots for lifting, which have been developed mostly in Japan for years, but which aren't in very wide use yet. And there are also telepresence technologies and other automated systems which might perhaps become more relevant. And this brings me to really another final point, which is that this has boosted the automation of one of the most under-automated areas of the UK economy, which is the NHS and healthcare. Now, healthcare and care generally are areas where it's really all about augmentation rather than automation, because it's really not possible for the personal aspect of care to be automated, and we wouldn't really want it to be. But as I showed in the previous slide, there are still ways to make it possible to do more by automating or augmenting the busy work around it, or maybe some of the harder physical work. I don't know if you've tried to see your GP lately, but when I have, it's now completely online with consultations by phone and prescriptions sent straight through to the pharmacy. And these systems were already partially in place, but now they're the default rather than an option. And again, that's not even talking about, say, AI-assisted diagnosis, which is also a possibility, but rather the administrative side of things is being reduced. So just now to kind of wrap up, I want to ask, how does automation play into other trends in the future of work? If you look at it the way I've set out today, automation isn't inherently threatening. A lot of the dangers of automation are really questions of how we do it, not the technology itself. And a lot of the risks from automation are around inequality. So who benefits from it? Traditionally, the idea is that automation, as well as leading to higher standards of living across the board, should also result in higher wages, because workers can make the argument that they're producing a lot more in less time. But actually, that really depends on the political environment and the institutions in place. And in the last 50 years, since the 1970s, wages in the UK have been fairly stagnant despite productivity growth. And then I'm also really interested in how our paid work interacts with the rest of our lives. Just because jobs aren't about to disappear entirely doesn't mean that our working lives won't be reshaped. As Merve said, because of the changes from automation and the way our habits have changed because of COVID. So this is where I want to call back to the points Merve was making around parental leave. We know that many people, but more substantially women, work a second shift doing care work, looking after children and relatives, that if it was valued at market rates, would add £1 trillion to GDP. That's the valuation of unpaid household labour, and that's all childcare, cooking, cleaning, etc., by the Office of National Statistics in 2014. Now, the entire UK economy in 2014 was worth 1.8 trillion. So that's a vast contribution to our collective well-being. And even just the unpaid contribution to adult social care was valued at £57 billion worth in 2017, again, by the ONS. So that's work that is essential to society, and we're more and more aware that it is really difficult to do it while working full-time. We need to think about what we want work to look like and how we can use automation to make it easier for people to live their lives as a whole. And I think, in theory at least, the productivity increases from automation don't leave much of an excuse for companies or governments to argue that they can't afford good parental leave policies or more flexible working hours for everyone. And in fact, really trying to make reductions in working time across the board could even help to drive productivity increases through automation as well. So you can reverse the process too. The same way that Keynes saw us working 15-hour weeks, automation should be able to improve standards of living as well as allowing us to benefit by either working less or being paid more. And this might sound idealistic or even utopian, but it really shouldn't. It does, though, require us to be aware of these possibilities and keep making the argument for them. So that's how I want to wrap up, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you've got about this. And I'll just, shall I unshare my screen? Does that, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, go ahead, then we can all see each other in beautiful HD quality. Yeah, thank you, Nan, for your talk, and you kind of did my job there by tying it back to Merve's talk as well. So thank you for that. I want to invite everyone to again leave their questions and comments in the Q&A and chat. One that I'll start by asking for Merve, just because it came in just as you were starting your talk, Nan. So it's a 3-part question. I'll ask all of it together, and then yeah, take the bits that you want to take. So do you see longer paternity leave as a step forward for gender equality? What other measures do you believe could help decrease this gap? And do you believe the change should come from government or from private companies? And that's from Barbara, I should say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara, for this question. I think, or questions, it is really touching many different points. One thing, it is better if there is statutory leave. So if the policy comes from the government, for instance, across the EU, this is quite a norm. But whereas if you look at the US, which is one of the few industrialized countries where there is no statutory leave. So it's only in some states they have, but it's not across the whole country. And there it's more based on companies. And on one hand, it is, of course, it's an attraction point for companies to hire more skilled, more talented workers. But since if it is when it is based on companies, it is so you can't it is prone to more inequalities basically. So it's better if it is coming from a statutory level. So if it is a government policy basically. Speaking of a paternity leave or involvement of fathers, so there are policies trying to involve more fathers in, and to do that, usually let's take the Swedish example, for example. So they have a longer tradition of parental leave policies. In fact, they are the first country which the parental leave policies introduced. It was 1974. And you can find online, like from 1978, some like TV ads that this really masculine man spending time with children. So it's really promoting for fathers' involvement. And so they now most recently, so since 2016, they have 90 days for fathers to take leave only for fathers, reserved for fathers. So this increase these fathers' involvement. Of course, the thing is they actually have even longer times available for them, but they only take these reserved days. So it's really important to start from that point, that really like in a way motivate or make it the norm, that it is okay, the normal is fathers take some time of leave. So the longer this leave, the better. But of course, there are many layers, so it is usually expensive to take this leave because it is usually not really well paid. So one really needs to take, so there are multi-layers, so one cannot really say, oh, these fathers, they don't really care. No, it's also like, it's not only from fathers, but also workplaces needs to collaborate. So it is, some research shows, like based on workplaces, when there are so the collegial effort and impact is really important. So when there are managers who are taking leave and promoting this, then it is more likely that people will opt in for this leave. So developing this culture at the workplaces is maybe where we will start. So I think, and the other thing is awareness. So also there are research showing that one of the main reasons actually that people not really aware what's available for them. So if there is no one taking this leave, you may not even consider that you would be eligible for such leave. So that's why it is really important for researchers, for HR, for policymakers to really promote and being vocal about what is available and what are the demands and how to really reconcile both of them all together. So everyone can, I mean, I think companies have a huge role here in really making these policies work. I don't know if this is enough of an answer, but I think this is where we can start thinking from.
Yeah, no, I think that was really clear. I think especially the emphasis that the onus is on the government to start, because private companies may not necessarily take that opportunity up unless they can afford to. So private companies can do more of the promoting side of it. And I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add there from your research and work in the past as well on that one.
I'm not sure really about, I mean, I think this area is really, really interesting. And I think it's key to understanding the way work is. The problem with the way economists analyze work is they really do only look at paid work. And more recently, sort of feminist economics has forced them to sort of add, you know, like the way I was quoting the ONS statistics, to add the amount of unpaid work that we all really do, a lot of people more than others, to the sort of measure of GDP, which is a very, very political measurement in a lot of ways. It leaves a huge amount out. So I think it's really important for them, as Merve said, for a lot of this to be done at a sort of across the whole of society, because although I think there should be a lot more opportunity for individuals and via sort of maybe institutions like unions or, you know, whatever institutional arrangements we can to sort of lobby their own employers to get these kind of things in place, because that's simply not possible across all work. Like Merve was saying, a lot of precarious work. It is really important that we have these at a sort of at the level of whole countries and whole societies as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We've got another question here from an anonymous attendee for you, Nan. It was asking, where can we start reskilling ourselves? So I guess if your employment, your job is at risk of automation and augmentation, what are avenues to start exploring what's possible for you to move, kind of sidestep?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a tricky question. I can probably mostly answer this on a personal level, because I've kind of done the same thing very recently. And I did end up doing this kind of, well, reskilling career changey course at General Assembly. And there are a lot of kind of similar kind of tech companies that that will sort of reskill you for a tech career. I mean, but it's, you know, and they will do it very quickly, but it's expensive, and it's kind of, you know, it's a lot for an individual to put into that, maybe to learn skills that you can also learn by yourself. You can, you know, there's, for technology at least, there's a huge amount available online for free. But having said that, I really think that more of this education needs to be available, again, at a national level, and for people to be aware of what is possible. I think Faethm is sort of looking, hopefully, at working more and more with education companies, as well as with businesses and governments, to see where it's possible to highlight the pathways that people can take to move from one career to another.
Yeah, no, I think
it's really hard. I think there's a really good, I mean, I don't think there are great solutions to that necessarily at the moment. It's obviously very piecemeal.
Yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think one thing that came to mind is when you think of jobs in tech or technology, you immediately think of the technical roles where you might need to be a coder or a developer or an engineer or something like that. And speaking as someone who works in tech sales, there's also an element of the soft skills you bring. So you don't have to be a technical person to work in tech. So for that person, kind of do, I guess, like a skills audit or skills assessment to see what skills you have that aren't just like something you put on your CV, like proficient in.
Yeah, exactly. And those soft skills are also the ones that are least at risk from automation. So like your sales abilities are not things that a chatbot can do really. So those are, yeah, congrats. But seriously, those kind of creative, more kind of interpersonal skills are absolutely the ones that are going to grow. So yeah, you're right. That's a really good place to start probably.
Cool. I'll leave the Q&A in the chat open for just a little bit longer. I know we are over the hour at the moment, so thank you to everyone who did stick around. If you want to drop any last few questions in the chat or the comments, do so now, because then we can capture those on the recording. But otherwise, while everyone does get their last few questions in, I'm going to quickly just wrap up with our final announcements. So yeah, just as I mentioned at the beginning, we have our Christmas special event coming up. It's on the 1st of December at 4 p.m. UK time. So join us for some festive fun. We've got, again, 2 incredible speakers lined up, and then also a quiz where you can win some prizes. So hope to see you there. But yeah, I'm going to stop sharing and yeah, wait out for some more questions.
Actually, I've got a question for Merve possibly, but do you?
Good.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I just wondered, in terms of like the additional allowances that have been brought in after COVID, do you see any of that like being maintained, or do you think it'll get withdrawn again? Because we're sort of seeing similar things in the UK with the increases to universal credit and arguments against, withdrawing that. But do you think these might be permanent changes or not?
It is tough. It depends. For instance, the extra leave scheme, which was rolled out in Luxembourg, was fully compensated, and it turned out to be too costly. So it depends. So, for instance, I think from a personal point of myself, like rolling out more universal credit is something good, and it's better if it is kept. But so the sustainability is a huge problem. So it really needs to be well calculated so that it can really go on in a more like horizontal way and access more people in need. Hopefully at some point, like the number of people who are in need, hopefully that is to be reduced. Maybe that would be the ideal case, but as long as that it continues, sustainability is a huge component. So it depends on the level of, I think, increase. So if you increase the amount for existing people who are already in the pool, or if you keep the same scheme but you reach more people. So I think these are the things to be considered. Yeah, but in the end, this can be also very political, so it can get really political. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
I think this talk has been a really interesting one, because it is towing the line of data, which is seen as quite objective, and then politics, which is your own personal.
Yeah, it's just, I think, I mean, parental leave policies in general, I find it really fascinating because it speaks to everyone's lives and everyone can relate basically. And we can all have a say in it because we are like either even if you have a kid to care or not, like with those responsibilities and of course this invisible work that we are all doing, which is what Nan mentioned, the unpaid work, it holds a great value, but it is basically untold, invisible, and yeah.
And actually, as someone who's sort of started from the political side of things originally, rather than the data side, I would argue actually that that even though we think data is objective most of the time, it's actually the way you frame it and the statistics that you're choosing, and the data itself might be objective, but whenever you talk about it, you're bringing in political assumptions right from the very beginning. So it's
definitely a good point, and ties into our last event as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was very interesting. Yeah.
We did have one more question. It's another one from Barbara, but it's a spin on the last question about the individual action. So this is more on what would your advice be to how companies and more specifically HR teams can help people to adjust to this version or this future of work, and how to deal with the fact that right now lots of people are afraid of losing their jobs.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of exactly what Faethm was created to address, really. And I mean, that those are the people that we work with most of all, really, is usually HR departments and workforce planning. So, you know, sort of Faethm is sort of the answer to that question in this context, or I don't have a better one, you know. Like that's kind of I mean, looking at it's really, really hard. I mean, we're not talking about seeing into the future or anything. We're not talking about sort of magically predicting where things are going. You always have, you know, events as well, like COVID or recessions or anything. So Faethm is really useful as a tool, this sort of with scenario planning. And it says, you know, if this happens, this could happen. This is kind of what you're looking at. And yeah, it kind of lays out, given all things being equal, these are the sort of changes that you can expect from technology. And this is where this technology can be useful in your business. So yeah, I mean, we do basically mostly work, a lot of the time working with HR departments and workforce planning.
Before we wrap up, and to answer that question, actually, I want to go back to Claire's comment that she mentioned in the beginning. If she's online, she's around. I think it would be nice to hear a real example from a company which is happened. So if Claire is here, if she can share.
Fortunately.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I agree. I mean, well, yes, there are these type of, like, as Faethm doing, so Nan suggested, that might be an option. But it also, like, I think it's for companies, it's also like it is very unique. Usually it's unique cases, because so it depends on the sector, it depends on the structure of the workforce in the company, and how so if there is only one person looking for that very specific thing, and if that person goes away, so how do you really share that person's work? So these type of things needs to be, so for a company, this is the thing to be considered. Other than that, because this leave is coming with job security, basically, so people shouldn't have any fears actually against losing their jobs. So because in an ideal world, they shouldn't be losing their jobs because of being on parental leave, since it is a statutory right. Yeah.
No, thank you for clarifying that as well. We are kind of 15 minutes over, so I'm going to end it there. I'd like to thank both Nan and Merve for presenting, taking the time out of your day to present today, and researching a lot into the topic. I took some notes down on some of the books and studies mentioned, so I'll make sure that those are included in our follow-up email. I'm also glad that we were able to connect you both. It's rare that we get two speakers on a similar topic, so I'm glad we were able to make that happen as well.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having us as well. I really enjoyed.
Yeah, me too. And thank you for providing this space for us to talk, to present, and to hear. That was great. And thank you for other attendees, participants, and for asking questions and contributing. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.